Grant rescheduled our wedding for the third time on a Tuesday morning, over a text that read, "Diana needs me. Please just understand." I said I understood. Then I opened my ledger of device serial numbers and found Diana Marsh's name in it 4 months before her first surgery. I did not tell him that part. My mother taught me to keep a ledger before I knew what the word meant. She was a hospital pharmacist for 22 years, and she used to say that computers forget on purpose and paper does not. I did not understand her until I was 26, sitting in a conference room, listening to a company lawyer explain that the hip implant that killed her had been recalled 4 months before her surgery, and that the recall notice had been logged into the hospital's system, and then quietly overwritten. Nobody was ever charged for that. The surgeon who performed the implant, a man named Preston Hale, testified that he had never received the recall notice. The hospital's own records agreed with him. My mother's death certificate says cardiac arrest during a routine procedure, and for 6 years that has been the only sentence anyone let me have. So I started keeping paper. Every device serial number that crossed my desk at Meridian Orthopedic Devices, I wrote by hand into a black ledger before I ever logged it into any system, because a system is a place where a sentence can be quietly replaced with a different sentence. Paper is harder to lie to. It was the only inheritance my mother left me that nobody could recall. Grant Sinclair proposed to me in the parking lot of that same hospital, which I did not think was strange until much later. He drove me there on the 3rd anniversary of my mother's death without telling me where we were going, and when I realized it, my whole body went cold before he even got the ring out. "I wanted the place that made you who you are to also be the place you yes," he said, kneeling on asphalt still warm from the day. "I know that's strange. I wanted it to mean something instead of just being romantic." I cried for reasons he read as joy. Some of them were, I said yes standing in the exact spot where a nurse had once told me there was nothing more anyone could do, and for a while, that felt like the most healing thing anyone had ever built for me on purpose. We set our date 14 months out at Harrow House, the boutique hotel his family owns on the river, because it cost his family nothing and it cost me every favor I had left. My father does not have that kind of money. I paid the vendors in installments I tracked in the same black ledger, the same handwriting, the same pen my mother used to sign her own charts. Grant's mother, Margaret Sinclair, has never once said my name without a half-second of hesitation before it, as if she is checking that it is still the name she is supposed to use. She introduces me to her friends as Grant's fiancée. She once called Diana Marsh the daughter she'd always wanted, at a Christmas party, in front of me while refilling everyone's wine but mine. Diana Marsh dated Grant for 6 years before I existed in his life at all. They broke up cleanly, or so everyone told it, 2 people who simply wanted different lives at 26. She moved to Boston. She came back 4 years later, the same season Grant and I got engaged, and rented an apartment 11 minutes from his office. I did the math on that once, quietly the way I do math on everything now. 4 years away, then engaged. Then back. I told myself it meant nothing. I have gotten very good this year at telling myself things. Renata Kim, who sits 2 desks from me at Meridian, was the only person who said the quiet part out loud back when it might still have counted as a joke. An ex who resurfaces the exact season you get engaged, she said, not looking up from her spreadsheet, isn't a coincidence. It's a project management decision. I laughed because it was funny, and because the alternative was believing her. Diana started appearing at the edges of things after that. A mutual friend's engagement party, a charity 5-kilometer run Grant's firm sponsored every spring. Nothing anyone else could call following him, nothing anyone else seemed to notice as strange at all, just a woman who kept turning up in rooms she had every technical right to be in. I mentioned it once to my college roommate, Megan Doyle, over a call that dropped twice from bad signal. She said I was overthinking it, that exes exist in the same cities as their exes all the time, that I would talk myself into something ugly if I kept counting coincidences instead of simply enjoying my own engagement. I wanted to believe her more than I have ever wanted to believe anyone about anything. For a while I managed it. Diana's first surgery happened 9 months after she moved back. A car accident, she said, a herniated disc, emergency stabilization. Grant called me from a hospital parking lot, the same one, and asked if we could push the wedding from June to September. I said of course. What kind of person says no to a woman in an ambulance? I called my father that night to unhold the date. He is a quiet man who has never once told me what anything cost him, financially or otherwise, and he did not start that night either. He just said, "All right, sweetheart," the way he always does, and I heard him open a drawer where I know he keeps the folder with the deposit receipts, sorting through the wreckage of a date that no longer existed. The second surgery came 4 months later. Hardware failure, they said. A screw that had shifted, a revision procedure, 6 more weeks of recovery that Grant insisted on personally supervising. We moved the wedding from September to the following March. I ate the deposit at the string quartet. I lost the deposit at the florist entirely, because their contract only allowed one reschedule for free, and nobody had told me there would be a need for 2. I did not know yet that hardware failure was a phrase that would come to matter to me professionally, not only personally. I filed it away without noticing I had filed it, the way you do with a splinter you will only feel again once it is already infected. Margaret sent a bouquet to Diana's hospital room that week, and a card to me that just said "thinking of you both," as though Grant and I were the ones who required sympathy for someone else's misfortune. I kept the card. I am not entirely sure why, except that even then, some instinct in me understood it might matter later to have kept things. My father asked me, gently over dinner that month, if I still wanted to marry into a family that treated my own wedding date like a placeholder. I told him I loved Grant, which was true, and that everyone was just going through something hard, which I was no longer sure was true even as I said it. He didn't push. He just refilled my water glass and let the silence do the parts of the conversation neither of us wanted to finish out loud. I met Julian Voss because of a spreadsheet. Part of my job at Meridian is running quarterly post-market audits, confirming that partner hospitals are logging our hardware's serial numbers correctly, the exact process that failed my mother. Millbrook General is one of our largest accounts. I requested confirmation records for a batch of spinal fixation hardware, routine, the kind of request that usually gets answered by whoever happens to be on duty in medical records that week. A man named Jay Voss answered instead, and he answered every question I had actually asked, plus 2 I had not thought to ask yet. "You'll want the anesthesia log too," he wrote. "The hardware confirmation alone won't tell you what you're actually looking for." Nobody in medical records has ever known what I was looking for before I did. I wrote back and asked how he knew I was looking for anything at all. He took 4 hours to answer, which I would later learn was exactly how long it took him to decide how much of the truth I could be handed at once. "Because you're the only auditor who's asked about this specific lot number twice in 6 years," he wrote. "Once under your company email, once under a name I don't think was yours." That name was my mother's. Eleanor Ashford had requested her own surgical hardware confirmation 19 days before she died, and had never gotten an answer. I did not tell him that, not yet. I asked, instead, why a records clerk would remember 6 years of request history well enough to notice a pattern like that. He did not answer that question. He answered a different one, the way I would come to learn he often did when a question got too close to a door he wasn't ready to open. "If you ever need someone to actually look, instead of just answer," he wrote, "I'm here more hours than the job requires." I asked him why he was offering that to a stranger over a routine hardware confirmation request. "Because 6 years ago," he wrote, "I asked someone at a records desk to actually look into something instead of just answering the form in front of them, and nobody did. I don't know what that ended up costing, in the end. I've been the kind of careful ever since that doesn't let it happen twice on my watch." We wrote to each other for 3 weeks before I learned his last name by accident, a slipped signature at the bottom of an email he'd meant to send someone else. Voss, Julian Voss. I held on to it the way I held on to everything else that year on paper, in the ledger, under a date. He was careful in a specific way, the careful of a person hiding something for a reason, not from a person. I noticed it. I filed it the way I file everything. I did not ask, because I already had one fiance's secrets to manage that season, and Julian Voss's silence, whatever was underneath it, at least came with real answers attached. The banter helped more than I expected it to. He sent me a photograph once of a coffee machine in his office break room with a handwritten sign taped over the display. "Out of order, feelings about this are valid." I laughed out loud in my own kitchen, alone, for the first time in 11 weeks. "You should see the one on the second floor," I wrote back. "It works fine, nobody trusts it." "Nobody trusts anything that works on the first try," he wrote. "That's not cynicism. That's just Millbrook General." We met in person for the first time on a Thursday, in the records office itself, because I'd driven 2 hours to collect a physical file Meridian's lawyers wanted an original signature on. He was younger than his careful sentences had made him sound, and taller, and he looked at me the way you look at a person whose handwriting you have already memorized without ever having met the hand. You write everything down, he said, nodding at the ledger under my arm, no greeting first, like we were already mid-conversation. I assumed. I didn't expect the actual book. You get used to systems lying to you, I said. Eventually you stop trusting anything you can't hold. I know the feeling, he said, and something moved behind his face too fast for me to read it, and was gone before I could ask. Do you actually drink the coffee here? I asked, mostly to fill the silence he'd left hanging. Or is the sign just for morale? Neither, he said. I bring my own thermos and let everyone assume I'm being efficient instead of paranoid about hospital coffee specifically. That's a very specific paranoia. I contain multitudes, he said, most of them tired. He walked me to my car after, and neither of us pretended it was only about the file. If you were ever actually in danger over this, he said at the door, in the tone of a man stating a fact rather than making an offer, I'd want to know before you did anything else. Not after. Before. I did not know yet how literally he meant that. Diana's third surgery was announced on a Tuesday, over breakfast, before I had finished my coffee. Grant's phone buzzed twice, then a third time, and he set down his fork with the specific gentleness of a man about to ask for something he already knew was too large. It's not the same as before, he said. The second surgery didn't take. They found something new on a follow-up scan. She needs a third procedure, and her father can't fly back in time, and I told her I'd be there. I asked when. He told me the date overlapped our final venue walkthrough at Harrow House, 6 days before the wedding itself. I'm not asking to move the wedding, he said, a lie he believed while he was saying it, because the very next sentence was, I'm asking if we could shift it 3 weeks. Just 3 weeks. Diana needs me right now, and I need you to just understand that. Please, Claire. I looked at him for a long moment. 3 weddings worth of vendors flashed behind my eyes. 3 non-refundable deposits. 3 dresses fitted to a body that kept holding its breath through every fitting. 3 times I had told my father to hold the date, and 3 times I had called him back to unhold it. I understand, I said. I did understand. That was the worst part. I understood completely, and it changed absolutely nothing, and somewhere underneath the understanding a colder, quieter thought was taking its coat off and making itself at home in me for good. This was never about Diana's spine. This had never once been about Diana's spine. I called Megan that same afternoon, hoping for something sharper than what my own family could offer. She sighed instead. 3 reschedules is a lot, Claire, I'll give you that. But you don't call off an engagement over bad luck. Some people just have bad luck around them. I did not have the vocabulary yet to explain that I no longer believed in the bad luck. I only had a lot number, a colder feeling than I had ever let myself feel about anyone, and a ledger with an entry in it 4 months too early to be a coincidence. I decided, somewhere around then, to stop asking people to see what I saw, and start proving it to them instead. That night I opened the ledger to the page from 4 months before Diana's first surgery, back before there had even been a first surgery to schedule anything around, back when Grant and I had just set our wedding date, and sent the invitations to print. I had flagged a device request that month. Lot 4419, a spinal fixation set, pulled for a procedure at Millbrook General under a patient code I hadn't been able to match to a name at the time, because Meridian's audits use anonymized identifiers unless a hospital specifically requests otherwise. I had written a note beside it, in my own handwriting, 6 years of habit deep. Check again in 6 months. I never had. Life gets in the way it does, and the note had waited in that ledger like a held breath waiting to be let out. I emailed Julian the lot number at 11 that night, expecting nothing until morning. He answered in 4 minutes. That lot was recalled, he wrote. 6 years ago, it should not exist in any hospital's active inventory. It should not be inside anyone. I asked him, my hands not entirely steady on the keys, how he knew the recall history of a 6-year-old lot number off the top of his head at 11 o'clock at night. This time he answered fully. Because I've been tracking Preston Hale for longer than I've worked in that records office, he wrote. I'm not just filing paperwork, Claire. I need you to trust me for about 2 more weeks, and then I will tell you everything, including why I might be the wrong person to be trusting you back. 2 weeks, he explained, because Millbrook General was hosting its Founders Gala in 17 days, the annual black tie fundraiser where the hospital hands out its Excellence in Patient Care Award. This year, the award was going to Preston Hale. The state board's inquiry window closes the same week, he wrote. If we don't have a documented complaint filed before the gala, the file goes back in a drawer for another year, and his own hospital will have just handed him an award for the exact year he was running this. I need it filed clean. I need it filed before then. I asked him if trust me for 2 more weeks was something he said to all his witnesses. Only the ones who already keep their own paper trail without being asked, he wrote. Which is one person. It's you. You're doing great, by the way, for the record. Most people don't notice a dead lot number sitting quietly in their own ledger for 6 years. I noticed it in 6 years and 1 line. I wrote back. Try to contain your excitement. Contained, he wrote, barely. I called Simone Beckett, our wedding coordinator, to ask about moving the date a 3rd time. She had rebooked Harrow House for us twice already, brisk but kind both times. This time there was a new flatness underneath her voice that I filed away without naming yet. Mrs. Sinclair already called me this morning, Simone said. Margaret had never once been called Mrs. Sinclair by mistake in my hearing before. Simone said it like a woman quoting a memo she hadn't wanted to receive. She asked me to go ahead and hold the 4th Saturday in April, just in case. Just in case of what? I asked. I didn't ask, Simone said, and there was something underneath that sentence I did not yet have the tools to open. Margaret called me herself 2 days later, ostensibly about flowers. I do think, she said, in the tone she reserves for opinions she has already filed as facts, that you could stand to be a bit more gracious about all this. Diana has been through so much. It costs you so little to simply be patient. It's cost me 3 deposits and a florist who won't return my calls anymore, I said. Money, Margaret said, and the word came out of her mouth, like something she was scraping off the bottom of a shoe, isn't really the measure of a gracious woman, Claire. A pause, timed like she had rehearsed it in a mirror. Grant has always said you can be a bit rigid when things don't go exactly your way. I did not cry until after I hung up the phone. I want that on whatever record this becomes. I did not cry while she was still on the line. There was a fresh wound I hadn't told anyone about yet, not even Julian. 2 weeks before the 3rd reschedule, I'd been reconciling our joint wedding account and found a withdrawal I didn't recognize, $4,000, memoed simply as DM Medical. I confronted Grant gently, the way you confront a person you still want to be wrong. He said it was a loan. Diana's insurance had a gap, he said, and he'd covered it, and he'd meant to tell me, and there had just never been a good moment. I did not tell him that part of that account was my mother's life insurance payout, the only $4,000 of it I had let myself touch, set aside specifically for a wedding she would never see. He did not know that detail existed to be taken. That did not make it not taken. I wrote it in the ledger anyway, under its own date, the way I write everything that costs me something I cannot get back. $4,000 of my mother, spent on a woman who was never actually sick. I asked Julian, carefully, whether the patient attached to lot 44199 had a name yet, in whatever version of the truth he was allowed to hand me before his 2 weeks were up. I can't give you a name from my side, he wrote. Privacy law, and also I would like to keep's particular job for 11 more days. But I can tell you the surgeries were billed under 3 separate procedure codes, for what should have been one continuous treatment plan. Fragmenting a single condition into multiple billable procedures is a specific kind of fraud. It's called unbundling. It works best when the same surgeon signs off on all 3. I did not need him to say her name. I had already done the arithmetic myself, the way I do all my arithmetic now. 3 surgeries, 3 reschedulings, 1 surgeon, 1 ex-girlfriend, 1 wedding date that kept sliding to make room for all of it. Preston Hale did my mother's hip replacement, I wrote, because it was time he had that piece too, if I was going to keep asking him to hand me his. He did not answer for 11 minutes, which from Julian was the equivalent of another man putting his head in his hands. I know, he wrote finally. That's actually where this starts for me too. I should have told you that in the first email instead of the 4th. How do you know that? I typed and deleted it and typed it again, because some questions deserve to be asked twice, so the person answering can't pretend afterward that they misheard the first time. In 11 days, Julian wrote, I'm going to tell you exactly how, and exactly who I am, and you're going to be angry with me for some part of it. I would rather you be angry at me holding the full picture than trusting me on half of one. Can you give me 11 days, Claire? I have never once asked you to trust me blind. I'm asking you to trust me on a timer I built myself and showed you the face of. I told him yes, because I am, it turns out, a woman who says yes to timers. I have been saying yes to timers since June. At least this one had an ending date I got to help build, instead of one that kept sliding every time somebody else needed it to. 4 days before the gala, the digital confirmation record for Lot 4419 disappeared from Millbrook General's own system. Julian texted me a single line at 6 in the morning. "It's gone. Someone with admin access pulled it last night. I can prove the record existed. I can no longer prove what it said, not on their side of things." I asked what that meant for the board complaint. "It means my evidence," he wrote, which is Meridian's own original manufacturing and shipment records, just became the only version of this story that hasn't been touched by anyone with a reason to touch it. It also means someone already knows exactly what we're looking for. That same afternoon, Renata forwarded me an email with no subject line of her own, just 3 words. "Look at this." Compliance had received a complaint. Millbrook General's administration had reported that a Meridian auditor, unnamed but obvious enough given the lot number cited, was conducting unauthorized cross-referencing of patient-adjacent data for reasons unrelated to her assigned scope. My manager had been asked to open a formal review of my system access, effective immediately. I sat at my desk and did not move for 4 full minutes. Then I called Grant, because I still believed, in that specific and expensive way you believe things you desperately need to be true, that he was not part of this particular piece of it. He picked up already annoyed, which told me Margaret or Diana had gotten to him first and had gotten there hours ago. "Diana said you've been digging through her medical records," he said. "Claire, tell me that isn't true." "I've been auditing device serial numbers," I said, "the same job I've had for 6 years, the same job that exists, Grant, because of what happened to my mother." "She's scared," he said as if I hadn't spoken at all. "She thinks you're trying to hurt her over something that happened years before I even met you. Do you hear how that sounds? My mother thinks you might need to talk to someone. I'm starting to wonder if she's right." There it was, the exact shape of the thing I had felt circling for 6 weeks, handed to me finally in his own voice. I was the unstable one now. I was the one who needed managing, the one whose grief had curdled into something ugly and untrustworthy. It was, I would think much later, an almost impressive piece of choreography, and none of the choreography had been mine. "I understand," I said, because it was the only sentence I had left that still fit in my mouth, and because I had, by then, learned exactly how much weight that particular sentence could carry without meaning a single word of it. For one full breath, standing in my own kitchen with the phone still warm against my ear, I let myself wonder if they were right. If 6 years of grief had quietly rotted into something I could no longer trust about my own judgment, it would have been so much easier to be the unstable one. Unstable, at least, could be fixed with an apology and enough time. Then I looked down at the ledger still open on my counter, at 19 days before her death written in my mother's own hand at the top of a request that never got answered, and the doubt went exactly where doubt goes when you hand it something solid enough to stand on instead. I hung up the phone. I did not cry this time either, but for a different reason than before. There was nothing left in me still reaching for his approval, nothing left to spend on grieving the loss of it. I opened the ledger, turned to a clean page, and wrote a single line in handwriting steadier than I expected of myself, "No more understanding for free." I did not call Margaret. I did not call Diana. I did not call my own manager to defend myself, not yet. Defense is what a person mounts when they still believe the argument is being judged fairly. I called Julian instead and told him about the compliance complaint. "They're trying to make you the story before you can make Hale the story," he said. "It's a classic move. It only works if you spend the next 4 days defending your access logs instead of finishing the file. So don't. Send me everything tonight. I have somewhere safer to put it than either of our employers currently offers." I sent him 6 years of ledger photographs page by page, time-stamped, along with the shipment manifest I still had full clearance to on Meridian's side, the side nobody at Millbrook General had thought to lock yet, because nobody there knew Meridian kept vault records fully independent of the hospital's own system. 2 days before the gala, Simone called me at 9 at night, crying before I even finished saying hello. "I need to tell you something," she said, "and I need you to not hate me for how long I sat on it." 3 weeks earlier, Simone had been arranging linen samples in the small dining room at Harrow House when Diana Marsh walked past the open door, phone against her ear, laughing in the specific register of a woman who has decided no one who matters can hear her. "The second one bought us 4 months," Diana said. "The third one's going to buy us the whole spring. Preston says one more set of scans and Grant will believe I've got a spine made out of tissue paper. He still thinks I'm the one doing him a favor, if you can believe that." She laughed again, brighter this time, and did not lower her voice even slightly, because women who have never once in their lives been questioned rarely think to start. "I'm not even nervous anymore," Diana said. "Nobody checks a surgeon like Hale. He's been doing this since before I was even born." Simone had stood very still behind a folding table stacked with ivory silk, holding a swatch she would later be unable to look at without feeling sick, and had, for reasons she would spend 3 weeks being ashamed of, said absolutely nothing to anyone. "I have a recording," Simone told me now, her voice thin down the line. "I hit record out of instinct, the kind you develop planning weddings for families like the Sinclairs. And then I just sat on it. Harrow House gets 6 events a year from people adjacent to that family. I told myself it wasn't my business. I told myself that for 3 weeks straight." "What changed?" "You said I understand to Grant one more time than any person should have to say it in one lifetime," Simone said. "I was in the next room, steaming your veil, the day you found out about the 3rd surgery. I watched your face do something I am not going to be able to forget for a long time. That's what changed." The Founders Gala filled the ballroom at Millbrook General's East Pavilion with round tables, string lights, and the specific hush of a room full of people who have all agreed in advance to be impressed by each other. Grant sat near the front with his mother. Diana sat one seat down from him, in a dress the color of good news, laughing at something that was probably not funny. "I was not on the guest list. I came anyway," on Simone's arm wearing the ivory silk sample she said she would never be able to sell to another bride after tonight, whatever happened. Preston Hale took the stage at 8:40 for his Excellence in Patient Care Award, silver-haired and unhurried, the kind of man who has never once in 61 years been made to wait for anything, including consequences. Julian Voss walked up before Hale finished his second sentence of thanks, and he was not wearing a records clerk's badge. He wore a suit that fit him like a decision that had already been made, and beside him stood a woman I did not recognize yet, holding a folder the exact color of an official complaint. "My name is Julian Voss," he said into a second microphone someone had clearly arranged for exactly this moment, which meant he had planned this far more carefully than I had let myself imagine. "For the last 4 months, I have been embedded at this hospital as a fraud investigator for the State Medical Board. Before that, for reasons some of you already know and the rest are about to, I became the majority beneficiary of a family trust that holds controlling interest in Meridian Orthopedic Devices, a company whose manufacturing records I have full legal authority to release without needing anyone's permission but my own." The woman beside him, Vivian Cross, opened her folder. "Dr. Hale," she said, pleasantly, the way you would address someone at the start of a routine appointment, "we have manufacturing and shipment confirmation for lot 4419, recalled 6 years ago, showing it was never returned to circulation after that recall date. Your hospital's own billing records list that same lot as implanted in one patient 3 separate times over the past 11 months. This is a private matter," Hale said, and his voice had gone thin in a way I recognized instantly, because I had heard that exact thinness in my own voice the week before, right before I finally stopped believing my own excuses for staying quiet. "It was a private matter," Julian said, "until your hospital nominated you for an award using this year's patient outcomes as the evidence of your excellent care." Simone stepped forward then, before anyone could stop her, and played 11 seconds of audio from her phone, held close against the standing microphone. Diana's own laugh filled the ballroom first, bright and easy, and then her own voice, unmistakable. "The second one bought us 4 months. The third one's gonna buy us the whole spring." Nobody in that ballroom made a sound for 4 full seconds. I counted them the way I count everything now. Margaret Sinclair's wine glass found the tablecloth before her hand seemed to notice it had let go of the stem. Grant did not look at Diana at all. He looked at me across 2 tables and 11 seconds of recorded audio, and I watched him finally finish the arithmetic I had completed weeks earlier. A ripple of whispers moved through the tables behind the silence, the specific sound of 200 people trying to look like they were not enjoying something. Somewhere near the back, a board member I did not recognize said, too loudly, "Well, someone get him off the stage," as if Hale were a difficult act at a wedding rather than a man about to be escorted out of one of the only rooms in the state that had never once made him answer for anything. Vivian Cross closed her folder. Dr. Hale, your hospital privileges are suspended effective tonight, pending full board review. This department will also be reopening an inquiry into a recall-related death from 6 years ago, given tonight's evidence regarding this same lot number's handling. She did not say my mother's name. She did not need to. I said it myself, quietly, just for me, in a room that was finally listening whether it meant to or not. Eleanor Ashford. Diana Marsh left before security formally asked her to, though not by much. Her insurance claims, I would learn over the following weeks, were voided in full and referred for fraud prosecution, 3 separate counts, one for every surgery that never happened to a spine that had never actually broken. Meridian closed its review of my system access 9 days later, the same week it opened a formal one into Millbrook General's billing practices instead. Nobody at my office ever apologized to my face for the 4 days I'd spent suspecting I might lose the only job that had ever made sense of my mother's death. I did not wait around for one. I had already gotten the only apology that mattered, from a folder in Vivian Cross's hands. Grant found me by the coat check 20 minutes later. He looked like a man who had aged, all at once, into the exact version of himself his mother had spent a lifetime grooming, and hated the fit of it for the first time in his life. I didn't know, he said. About any of it, I swear to you, Claire, I didn't know. I believe you, I said, and mostly I did. That's almost the worst part. You didn't need to know anything. You just needed to keep choosing to believe her over me, every single time it came up, and you managed that part all on your own, no help required. I can fix this, he said. Give me a chance to fix this. You had 3 chances, I said. You spent every one of them asking me to understand. I'm finished being the only person in this story who has to. Julian found me outside afterward, on the low stone steps of the East Pavilion, where the string lights didn't quite reach and the air still smelled like river water and cut grass. I should have told you sooner, he said, about the trust. About Meridian. I kept waiting for a version of that conversation that didn't sound like I'd been managing you the same way everyone else was. You gave me 11 days and kept every single one of them, I said. That's not managing anyone. Grant gave me 14 months and broke 3 of them without telling me why until it was already done. I know the difference now. I didn't always. For what it's worth, he said, the trust has been sitting there for 11 years. My grandfather left it to me when I was 24, and I never touched it, because taking it felt like agreeing that money was the only inheritance worth claiming. I only used it this month because it was finally good for something other than sitting there being enormous and useless. You could have led with the enormous part, I said. Would have saved me some very confusing feelings about a hospital records clerk. Where's the fun in that, he said, and for the first time all night, he almost smiled. He sat down beside me, close enough that our shoulders met, and did not say anything possessive or large. He just took my hand, turned it palm up, and pressed his thumb once against the small permanent grooves 6 years of the same pen had worn into my skin. I read every page you sent me, he said. I want you to know that, not just the useful parts. All of it. I think your mother would have liked knowing her ledger finally caught something, after all this time. I closed my eyes. Somewhere behind us the gala was still coming apart in slow motion, chairs scraping back, a board member already on his phone. Margaret Sinclair's voice pitched a half step too high for a woman trying to sound unbothered. None of it reached me the way it would have reached me a month earlier. 3 weeks later, I drove out to the cemetery on a Sunday morning for the first time in over a year, and told my mother out loud, in a voice that only the wind and a few very patient birds were around to hear, that her ledger had finally caught something worth catching. I told her about Lot 4419, and about a suspended license, and about a man named Julian Voss who read every single page without once being asked to. I did not cry that morning either. I had simply run out of tears that needed spending on anything except the good kind, and even those I decided could wait for a day that deserved them more. I did not need a 4th reschedule of anything, not a wedding, not an apology, not a version of my own life that waited politely for someone else's crisis to finish first. I had already arrived exactly where I was supposed to be. I was finished asking anyone to understand me. I finally understood myself. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.